Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Lobbing Scorchers. We are laying this one down on Thursday evening ahead of the Seattle Sounders' next match at St. Louis City SC in match day 3. No Noah this week, so to sub in, we've brought on friend of the pod. It's Tim Foss of Sounder at Heart and the newest co-host of the newest member of the Sounder at Heart podcast network. That's right, folks. We got a new podcast in the Sounder at Heart podcast network, Backpost Runners, which he is co-hosting along with another friend of the pod, Mark Kastner. Tim, gonna have you tell us all about Backpost Runners here in a second, but first of all, thanks for tapping in. How's it going? I'm excited to catch up with you.
Happy to join. It's going all right. Things they were nice out for a little bit. Now it's been, pissing rain, but that feels like it's supposed
Pretty
to be
par
what
for the
happens.
course, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
March.
You got a dog on your lap, it looks like. So that's
I got a
another
dog.
podcast for those watching on YouTube. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's Bobka. He might dish some takes. He's got feelings for sure.
Anything that involves chasing a ball, he perhaps might be interested in. So kind of an overlap in interests and passions there for you guys. But anyway, yeah, thanks for hopping on short notice. Appreciate you tapping in. Before we get started, I do want to shout out our sponsors, Hacks and Ferments, Podium Menswear, and Full Pull Wines. And also, as always, if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and like the video, sub to the channel, like, comment, subscribe, rate 5 stars, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, all socials, all that good stuff. Tim, let's talk some Seattle Sounders. But before we do that, real quick, I did want to give you the floor. Tell our audience about Backpost Runners and what you guys have going on there, where to find it, and what people can expect from the newest member of the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Yeah, Backpost Runners is a project, as you mentioned, from me and Mark Kastner. I think very similar to the magazine for being a sort of more evergreen version of the work that we do regularly on Sounder at Heart, where, the day-to-day, week-to-week coverage of a soccer team or multiple soccer teams tends to really be focused on kicking the ball and what happens on the training pitch and in the games. And it can be tough to look at sort of bigger picture stories. I think a good example of that maybe is for the first issue of the magazine, I got to write a profile of Andy T, who just really hadn't been profiled in a like human sort of way. There had been stuff about him as a soccer player, but him as a person hadn't really been covered anywhere. And the magazine provided an opportunity to do that. Backpost Runners is the premise is sort of an NPR show for soccer sickos, trying to look at some of the, maybe more cultural aspects of soccer in Seattle and in the US more broadly. We started with an episode that was about rivalries and adversaries. We talked with Jeff Ritter of The Guardian about the best rivalries in MLS and how the schedule has sort of shaped some of those, and the way those rivalries in turn are shaping the way the schedule is going to change. And we talked to G. Willow Wilson, famous for creating the character of Miss Marvel. She currently writes Poison Ivy for DC, an award-winning author. She talked to us about what makes a good villain and why they're important, and we got to talk about MLS villains for a bit. We're working on some new episodes. We're going to try to do something focused on the World Cup, but probably before then, something looking at fashion and jerseys. Still working on hammering out some of the details, but trying to broaden the types of conversations we get to have on the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
And you guys have put out one episode so far. I listened to it. Is great stuff. Where can people go find the first episode if they want to listen to that, and subsequent episodes when you put them out?
Those episodes are all just going to be on the regular No Sadieti Sounder at Heart podcast feed. I think They'll be available a little bit earlier to paid subscribers, but will be publicly available for every episode. They episodes are being pretty heavily researched and putting a lot of effort into them, so not putting them out super regularly. We're hoping to land on a cadence of about one every month or so, but some of that is restricted by just how busy regular lives are. So we're trying to get into a rhythm at the moment, but we'll have more information on upcoming episodes soon, hopefully.
I love it. Yeah, I think there's absolutely a space for more in-depth coverage of stories like that, and who these players are as people and their interests outside of the sport. So yeah, really looking forward to see what you and Mark do with that. We'll be following it and collabing a lot, I'm sure. So everyone, keep an eye out for Backpost Runners. Go listen to the first episode if you haven't, and check out all the ones that they're going to be putting out throughout the season. All right, Tim. Are you ready to talk some Seattle Sounders? Should we get right into it?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it. Yeah, so I mean, I think we are at a bit of a interesting point in the season right now, in that the season has just started, but you have the team going on a massive road trip here right as they are about to start CONCACAF Champions Cup. And as we're about to talk about, they have a bunch of injuries. So high stakes for these games in the sense that you never want the juggling of CONCACAF Champions Cup to come at the expense of your league form, if you can at all help it. We've seen it happen to a lot of times, countless teams, but Seattle included, where they are playing in CONCACAF Champions Cup, and it does come at the expense of the league form. So I think it is a question right now how they're going to handle this, the combination of this road trip and CCC starting. And I think that's a good place to start, because we're gonna talk about these news items that have come out from Sounders Land in the last day or so, starting with some not so fun ones, Tim. I mean, we got some injury updates via Sounder at Heart, and basically what's going on right now is the left mid position is under absolute siege. They're dropping like flies. You already had Pedro de la Vega out to start the season with his dislocated kneecap that he suffered on decision day last year. You had Jordan Morris go down 8 minutes into the season. And now you have Georgie Manungu, who picked up a foot knock leading up to Seattle's last game at RSL. And you have Paul Rothrock now apparently having his ankle examined. No word, I believe, on the exact severity of that. I think the idea is that he can maybe play at St. Louis, but to what extent, how fit he's going to be, all that seems like an open question. So it kind of does just underscore life in MLS sometimes, doesn't it? Like, you go into these seasons. I've learned a long time ago that the depth chart that you see in preseason, you can think that you're really deep at one position or multiple positions, and then we're 3 games into the season and they are already on, I think, option number 5 at left mid. Tim, how are you feeling about just the state of affairs health wise, particularly at that position? And how do you see them kind of handling this for this St. Louis game and moving forward if any of these guys have to miss additional time beyond that?
It's obviously tough, and they are stretched just about as thin as you can be stretched in your third game of the season. Uh, I think the good news, sort of looking towards St. Louis, is we saw Snyder Brunel played on that right wing for a bit against Salt Lake, and he looked up to the task at the very least. Uh, you do have, they could call Sebastian Gomez up from Tacoma Defiance on a short-term loan. He's signed to the first team, but is in that 31st roster slot, which is technically an off-roster slot requiring a season-long loan. That's a little bit in the weeds for this conversation, but he could play on the left wing. I think that would be a good, serviceable bench option for sure. It seems like maybe the most likely scenario is that Paul Arriola starts at left wing. That was where he was playing more or less this time last year, with Jesus Ferreira on the right wing, that combination was pretty deadly in the early stages of CONCACAF Champions Cup last year. So we could say that see that play out again, and then if you've got potentially at the very least Brunel and Gomez behind those two for bench minutes, you could potentially play Kalani Kosorienzi in an advanced position on the right if you need to move Ferreira around. Um, it's obviously not ideal. You know, we don't really know how much Paul Rothrock is going to be affected by whatever extent of an injury this injury happens to be. Similarly, I guess, for Georgie Manungu, he can start being worked into training, and they just have to test how well he's able to manage the pain from that.
Pain tolerance is what Schmetz was saying, right? So he can, it's not, he can play through it without worsening it. It's just a matter of the level of the discomfort and if he can play through that. But he was training this week and at least trying to play through it. And yeah, we'll see what happens with Paul Rothrock as well. But, you know, 3 games into the season, and we're talking about Snyder B and Sebastian Gomez playing on the wing. I mean, it is, again, par for the course for life in Major League Soccer, but it is also like, man, this position in particular, you know, obviously you came into the season with De La Vega still out, but you did have Jordan Morris and Paul Rothrock and Georgie, and you felt like you could withstand even a couple of hits at this position and you'd still be okay. But I mean, you can't really withstand 4 hits at any given position, can you? So,
right. And I think it's compounded by the fact that you're experiencing a pretty similar injury crisis, for lack of a better term, at center back, and both of them are sort of in this weird spot of like, you know, Kim Ki-hee is getting closer and Stu Hawkins is still a ways away, but if you're at training, you can see him working with the ball on the side. He's at least getting closer. Ryan Saylor is somewhere at the White House, which is pretty far away from being on the field for the Sounders. But similarly, you know, Jordan Morris gets his injury and it's 4 weeks out. Well, we're pretty close to halfway through that. And so the situation is almost made worse by how close you are to being out of it. Because the other injuries are just so uncertain and nebulous. And, you know, thinking of Georgie, even if he can play through it, how much is his game going to be impacted by a foot injury? Is he going to be as explosive? Is that going to impact his ability to take guys on 1v1? You know, it all remains to be seen, but it is a bummer to see for sure.
Yeah, and you know, I think the writing seems to be on the wall that Paul Arriola is at least going to draw the start. Looking at the St. Louis game, Paul Arriola is probably going to start in St. Louis. They made him available at Long Acres this week. That's usually a sign that that he's going to play. And I think from what Jo was saying and Nico, that they have him training out there. So I think that is what they're going to do. But, you know, Paul Arriola is coming off an ACL injury himself, and he has played, 11 minutes in the Sounders' first 2 games of the season. But yeah, this is per Jo, was getting reps with what could be the starters in Wednesday's training session. So I think that is what they're going to do. And honestly, given the injury crisis that we've discussed, you know, it's good that they traded for Paul Arriola, and being down 4 guys at one position, that's about as good an experience and option as you could hope to have in that situation. But I think the question is, you know, how close is he to fully fit? And I don't think he's probably anywhere particularly close to 90 fit right now. So I think what you're going to see is Paul Arriola roll for the first 50, 60 minutes of this game. And then I think from there, I think you're probably looking at Snyder B round 2, because you're right. Like in the RSL game, they were running him there and it looked pretty good. He actually almost scored a goal there at the end. So, you know, I'm never wild about the notion of playing guys out of position by necessity like that, but that does seem to be the situation that they're in. And if anyone seems to be up for it, Snyder B seems like he could be up for it. But how are you feeling just about the notion of Paul Arriola's first start coming off this injury? You know, I think we all know that he's a proven MLS player. He's a very good high level MLS player, but this is going to be his first start in over a year coming off an injury. What are you expecting as far as like how long he can go and what he's going to be able to bring? What can we rightfully expect him to bring to the table in his first start back coming off a very serious injury?
I think the point of not being 90 minutes match fit is a good one. I think it's reasonable to expect a good 45 minutes and then pushing for 50 or 60 minutes just to see how much you can get out of him in the start of the second half. Uh, he is going to be shaking off some rust, but I think the benefit is that he's a very experienced player. You're going to get a good shift out of him for as long as he's on the field. And for all that he hasn't had a ton of game time, he got good reps during preseason. And because of where he was at in his recovery, he was doing a lot of like on the ball training with the academy teams during the off season, which obviously is not the highest level of competition for a professional player well over a decade into his career, but is at least he should be fairly sharp from a technical perspective. It will take time for him to reacclimate to doing it at the speed and intensity of an MLS match, but I think you can feel pretty good about the idea of Paul Arriola starting for you.
Yeah, so let's talk about this St. Louis game as it pertains to all this real quick, because like I was saying, you have a situation where you're about to embark on a very lengthy road trip while Lumen Field undergoes these World Cup renovations, and that was going to be a challenge anyway. But now you've got all these injuries, and you're going to play a St. Louis team on the road that was not good last year and has a new coach because of how not good they were last year. And they also, you know, I was looking at their roster moves over the offseason, and there was nothing like super crazy or splashy in there to the point where I look at it and I'm like, all right, that guy alone or these guys are going to vault them to some sort of crazy different tier than they were last year. You never know. Maybe Johan Demet, I think is the new coach's name. Maybe he is just the guru and has them tactically advanced to the point where they improve a lot. But I'm kind of expecting them to be roughly a similar St. Louis team to what they were last year, which was honestly one of the worst teams in the league, definitely one of the worst attacking teams in the league. But you also have a St. Louis team that Seattle lost to in this exact stadium last year. And, it was deeply unpleasant going down memory lane about that particular game. I think out of all of the games that were the most unpleasant to watch last year, that one was up there in the pantheon. I would put San Diego away up there. I would put LAFC away up there, but St. Louis away. I mean, you remember that? That was early in the season. That was before Ferreira was. They were first integrating Ferreira, and it wasn't going super well yet. And the offense laid a pretty big egg that day, and it was even more frustrating because St. Louis, they weren't really doing all that much to score themselves. But then, of course, you have Edward Lowen step up and he hits a pretty insane free kick. And it was a 1-0 L. And that was some of the hottest discourse, I think, after a match of last year. I think a lot because of the Ferreira thing. People wanted instant returns from that trade and they didn't really get it. And he also was getting crash out adjacent in that game. Like there was some body language stuff. He was going at the ref, that kind of thing. And so I think everyone was feeling very negative after that game, including myself. But then, it turned out that as the year went on, things improved and this turned out to be a very good team offensively. But it is still, it is a road game, which is never easy, and it is a team that they just lost to. But when I look at it, I do think this should theoretically be very different circumstances to that. You have a team that is a lot more in place and everyone's already gelled and played together at this point, so it's not a team like last year that was in such a heavy acclimation period going into the St. Louis game. Now they're a lot more settled, and it's not really a similar situation like that. And you also have a team that they did show that they can score a lot of goals last year, and they looked like that certainly against Colorado. So you would think it would stand to reason that even with all these injuries, they should be able to go to St. Louis and have a much better chance at taking a win or at least a result than they did last year. But again, it's MLS. You just never know. How are you feeling as far as what would be an acceptable result in this game? Because for me, I look at this St. Louis team and where Seattle's at, and I think it is a winnable game, but it also is a road trip this lengthy. I do look at it and I'm like, you know what? If it did turn into a situation where they had to get out of there with a 1-1 or a 2-2 or any kind of draw, I would not be it wouldn't be the end of the world to me. I think it is the type of game, especially dropping that game at RSL, where it felt like you could have taken at least a point and then you didn't get any, that maybe that enhances the importance of winning this game. But I just look at the injuries, the schedule right now, and if they took a point from this, I think I would be okay with that. Where are you at on that?
It's tough because I think under most circumstances, a reasonable person can look at any away fixture in MLS, and especially, there's been a fair amount of conversation this past week about how heavy the home advantage is in MLS and that it seems like it's only increased. That you look at any away trip and you kind of can say, yeah, a point on the road is a good result most of the time. That is one of Siggy Schmidt's famous aphorisms, that if you win at home and tie away, like,
Yeah,
you're in good shape. But in the context of the second game of this 5-game road stretch, you lost that game against RSL where you really should have at least been able to get something out of it. Even with the injury issues, you look at this matchup and the Sounders should have the talent advantage. This is also, I would argue, the most winnable of the games on this stretch for the Sounders.
yeah, exactly.
I think anything other than a win is going to be a little disappointing. And I also, one, just harking back to the game last year, it goes under discussed because Minnesota United were doing such egregious terrorism, but they were not the only team playing terrorism football in the league last year. And St. Louis, under their head coach, who I do not remember his name, but they were certainly doing a little bit of a light domestic terrorism every single game.
They were the originators. They were doing it before even Minnesota started doing it to that egregious of an extent, I think.
I feel like, their head coach last year was himself a former center back. It seemed like game in and game out, he was trying to see how much more than 50% of his lineup could be center backs.
Yeah.
And that is not a recipe for enjoyable to watch soccer. Yohan Demay, maybe he's a good coach now. He hasn't been at any of his previous gigs.
So wasn't he interim for FC Cincinnati? That's all I kind of remember.
Yeah, he was at FC Cincinnati for a bit, not successfully, but also like at a point before Cincinnati were a good team in any capacity. And then he was at Ventura County, which is one of the California team's MLS Next Pro affiliate, and wasn't particularly successful there either. Maybe he has principles and theories that will play out differently for St. Louis, but it doesn't seem like that's been the case so far.
Yeah, I mean, well, hopefully that they can at least get a point out of this game, because If you lose back to back games at RSL to a bunch of 17-year-olds, and then you lose to this St. Louis team, which I don't think many people are particularly high on, that would be a tough way to start the season, just vibes wise. It's not like it would create an insurmountable hole or anything like that, but vibes wise, as you're going into CCC, I think winning this game would do a lot to help the situation, especially I think we're all feeling a little kind of uneasy right now about all these injuries. But all right, we're going to take our first ad break, and then we'll be right back talking some Leagues Cup schedule. The 2026 Evergreen State Kit is here, celebrating soccer throughout Washington State. Featuring a bright green base with dark and light blue accents on the shoulders and sleeve cuffs, the kit will be paired with light blue shorts and socks. Inspired by the club's Forever Green and For Evergreen motto, the Evergreen State Kit embodies the spirit, texture, and landscapes of the Pacific Northwest. Continuing the club's long and proud tradition of Northwest inspiration, the Evergreen State Kit includes 52 sparks for the 52 mini pitches built in communities across Washington by the Rave Foundation. The lower corner is emblazoned with the Evergreen State in reference to Washington's historical nickname. Order yours today at lobbingscorchers.com/kit. That's lobbingscorchers.com/KIT. Welcome back from the ad break, which you definitely did not skip. All right, Tim, let's talk some Leagues Cup. We had some news break with that today. The Leagues Cup schedule is out, and we now know that the Sounders will start their Leagues Cup title defense by becoming the first ever MLS team to play a Leagues Cup game in Mexico when they visit two-time reigning Liga MX champions Toluca on August 5th. Toluca, the top-ranked team in the tournament with 74 points in the past two campaigns. They currently sit second in the Liga MX Clausura table. The Sounders full draw August 5th at Toluca, August 9th versus Querétaro, and August 15th versus Chivas Guadalajara. So, Tim, Leagues Cup title defense is getting underway, and we have I wasn't sure that they were going to do this where they have the MLS teams now traveling to Mexico for some of these games. So let's talk about that to start it off. I think just the fact that they're actually doing that, because I think that is something that it had to happen to really balance this tournament a little bit, if for no other reason than that every time Liga MX teams perform poorly in this tournament or get knocked out of this tournament, their fans and media can immediately pivot to the excuse of, well, MLS is hosting all the games, and if Liga MX got to host some of these games, then maybe the results will. Okay, well, now I always thought that was kind of like if your league is actually that much better as you all say it is, should you not be able to take a couple results on the road? Like, what are we talking about here with that excuse? Anyway, but now they're still going to be hosting a lot less games still, but they're going to be hosting some. Toluca's got this game at home against the Sounders that they should be favored to win. So now I don't want to hear about that anymore from any of their media or pundits or their fan bases. Like, you're getting to host some of these games, and there'll be some novelty, I think, for MLS clubs going down there and traveling for these games for the first time. We see them do it in CCC all the time, but it's the first time for this tournament. So how are you feeling about just the fact that they're having Liga MX teams finally host these some of these games for Leagues Cup, and then the Sounders playing the first one of those at Toluca, one of the best teams in Liga MX?
I think having games hosted in Mexico is great, and I would say probably well overdue. It definitely was a weird situation where I don't know how much it was really publicly or openly being stated, but the front offices of Liga MX teams wanted the games played in the US because even if turnout wasn't great for them, the revenue they were getting from those games was better than the revenue they would be getting for similar turnout at their home venues. But you also had the coaches repeatedly pointing out, like, we had, because they still were playing Liga MX games, so would have situations where, I don't remember which team it was, but I think one of the Mexico City clubs had, like, they had a game maybe in Florida or something, and then they had to fly back to Mexico City and then fly back for another game in the US. Like, with travel only having really a rest day in between games, and yeah, you should be able to win some games on the road, but when you start factoring all of the logistics in, it really is a very unfair, unbalanced situation. So I think this does help balance the scales a little bit. I think it makes it a much more legitimate competition than it was. And, you know, we have lots of experience with the Sounders going to play away in Mexico, but there are lots of teams in the league who don't have that kind of experience, because if they have played in CCL at any point, maybe they have traveled to Mexico once in the last decade, twice. Like, I think it is easy to take for granted how often the Sounders have played against Mexican competition in those competitions, because they have regularly, even though they've only reached the final the one time, they've made it deep enough in the competition to be facing Liga MX teams. Uh, it's a little bit of, you suffer for your success, that the first time they have to do it in Leagues Cup is to play one of the best teams in Mexico right now. Toluca is a very good side. That's going to be a really tough test, but it should be a good game, I hope.
Yeah, where are you at on how much weight you're putting on Leagues Cup in general? Because I was thinking about that when this draw came out today, and I'm looking at the Toluca game, and I'm like, man, like that's going to be pretty tough to win. And if you look at the draw, they're probably going to need to win 2 games to advance. It feels like the odds are stacked against them having to play Toluca on the road in a tough group where you're going to need to win twice. So maybe I was pre-rationalizing and pre-coping. You can tell me if I am, but I do feel like the nice thing about winning a tournament, any tournament, is that the next time you play in that tournament, you can kind of play the house money card a little bit. That's what I think, maybe that's pre-cope, but I think that's what you earn by winning the tournament. Like, if they don't win Leagues Cup this year, I mean, it would be cool to repeat. It would be nice. It's not the trophy that I'm putting the most weight on this year. I mean, I think MLS Cup is always kind of the top dog, but like, I would much rather win CCC this year than I would win Leagues Cup if given the choice. Do you think it's like a fair way to look at this tournament this year as kind of like you can watch it stress free? If they advance and they make another run at repeating, great, awesome. If they go to Toluca and lose and get grouped, hey, you won it last year. You took down Messi and the Barca boys in front of 70K. No one can ever take that away. Shiny trophy, still shiny. Do you think that is that kind of how you're looking? That's how I'm looking at it. But are you on a kind of similar wavelength with that, or are you kind of more, no, they should go at gun for the repeat?
Oh, 100%. It's a Mickey Mouse tournament if they don't make it out of the group, and if they win it, then it's a real
Yeah.
trophy. I think this year is even weirder than Leagues Cup already is, because you're going to be back in MLS play for like a month and then break again to do Leagues Cup after World Cup. It's pretty janky. So my feelings about Leagues Cup might change as we get closer, depending on where the team's at when we're coming out of the World Cup break. Um, we could hopefully have Pedro de la Vega rounding into form again by the time this tournament kicks off, and he loved this tournament last year, so maybe that's the power that you need to push through Toluca, and Querétaro shouldn't be too much of an issue. That's a pretty stinky dog water team, but Chivas rebranding Chivas Guadalajara as Chivas USA has sort of surprisingly turned them around, because they've been
Wait, did they do that?
not actually,
Oh, okay.
but they've
Oh, I see. In like their
Chivas has been
acquisitions.
in a bad spot for a while,
Yeah.
and started shifting towards bringing in more Mexican American players. The kid from Chicago,
Brian Gutierrez.
Brian Gutierrez, seems like he's been cooking there. I know Cade Cowell left to join Red Bull New York on loan, but they've got Richie Ledesma. I'm sure several other guys who follow U.S. youth national teams have been obsessed with at one point or another over the last decade or over there. They've started. I think this is the whichever the Apertura or Clausura. I think we're in a Clausura right now.
Yeah.
They've been doing pretty well to start the season, so
They're always like, yeah, they have fallen on hard times in recent years, but I feel like in a tournament setting, they're always a factor. They're never going to be like a easy pushover game. It's a tough group. It's a tough group, and yeah, no, I think if they make it out of the group and they make a run, like you said, awesome tournament, super meaningful trophy. If they get grouped, Mickey Mouse cash grab. Who cares? Won it last year over Messi and the Barca boys. Keep it pushing. So I think we're on a similar page there.
Yeah, it's a bonus tournament, regardless of what happens.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be against them repeating. So
yeah,
go do it by all means. Don't let me stop you. All right, Tim. Shifting gears back to the Seattle Sounders themselves for this next segment. I have a couple little thought exercises for us that I wanted us to go through here quickly here. The first one, I wanted to give, both of us are going to give one reason for optimism and one area of concern regarding the Seattle Sounders through 2 games. You got 2 games in the books now. One win where they looked awesome against the Colorado Rapids. One L at RSL where the performance, what we can talk about what the performance was. The performance wasn't horrible, but they did take a bad L to a bunch of teenagers. So you got both ends of the spectrum. You got a great game, great result, great performance, got an L that was undeniably tough to take. So through 2 games, I'm going to give you the floor first. Why don't we start with your one reason that's got you feeling optimistic and good about this team's prospects, having watched these first 2 games?
I'm trying to think of something that is not going to step on either of our toes for a player that's got us most excited. But I think maybe the reason for optimism at this moment is that the Sounders have a better environment for overcoming the injury problems they're dealing with because of the talent development pipeline that they've built. We're going to touch on Tacoma Defiance towards the end of our conversation, so I don't want to walk on that too much, but if they need players for the wings, I mentioned Sebastian Gomez can play, but Yusuke Onome can also play on either of those sides in a very Jesus Ferreira style interpretation of a winger, very much like inverted pocket winger, where he's not going to hug the sideline. He's going to fill spaces. But, those are 2 guys who are reasonable to give a shot during this stretch where you're in a weird spot because all of your games are on the road, but you can kind of have a free hit to a certain extent. And similarly, they've got a couple guys who at this level are untested, but you do have options that there's only one way to find out if they're ready is to give them the chance. In Gallatin Sandness and Tino Lopez, who I think both have shown well in training and in preseason. So I think that is sort of my reason for optimism is they are dealing with an injury crisis, but if anyone is going to be able to navigate it, it is this team because of the system they've developed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great point about the injury crisis. But for me, the thing that's got me feeling good and like, all right, like this team could reach the heights that we're all hoping it can reach this season is just I really like a lot of what I've seen offensively so far over both games. I know everyone's feeling a little sour about what happened in the RSL game, and they only ended up scoring 1 goal in the game and they lost the game. So I get all that, but if you take a step back and you look at the totality of both of these games and both of these performances, you had an attacking performance against Colorado that I thought was pretty lights out, but also a carryover of a lot of the good stuff that we saw in attack last year, when the whole thing going into last year was the offense wasn't dynamic or productive enough in 2024. In 2025, we're really trying to be a team that just attacks better and scores more goals. And they did that. And I think you kind of saw the fruits of that in Leagues Cup. That's when I think they hit like their highest level of footy last year, was in the Leagues Cup run, when they were playing attacking footy, I think about as high level as I've ever seen a Sounders team play it. Like I don't want people to forget how, like, what level that they were on. You had Pedro de la Vega scoring Puskas nominees. They were 7-0 in Cruz Azul. They won 3-0 over Inter Miami. But like, the performances in that tournament were fantastic. And I thought the Colorado game, what I wanted to see in preseason and in the season opener against Colorado, was just them like keep doing that. Keep doing that. And I felt like they did that against Colorado. They won that game 2-0, but they scored 3 goals. The Hassani Dotson, they literally came out and said that the Hassani Dotson goal should have counted. So I'm gonna give him the 3-0 on that, even though it's only 2-0 in the books, which that was about all you could ask for, I think, from that standpoint. And then even in the RSL game, I'm curious what you thought of this, but like, it was funny coming out of that game. You still saw a lot of like the talking points that you always see when the Sounders take an L, which is like, oh, if they had if they had the U22 number 9, or if they would just sign like a big money attacker like LAFC and Inter Miami do, they would have won that game. And that was just not my takeaway from that game at all. Like, I felt like the offense in that game, it wasn't incredible. It wasn't a virtuoso attacking performance, but the chance generation was pretty good, I thought. Like, for a road game, like in a tough road game, a place you never win, like, the chances were there. You had a goal off a set piece and an almost goal off a set piece that Rafa Cabral made an insane save on. And then I thought they had a lot of success playing Paul Rothrock in behind and him taking those 1v1s on. And he created a couple good chances, really good chances. I thought there was one where I think he took a shot when he probably could have laid it off, but it was still a good attacking movement. It was a good chance. It's the type of stuff that you want to see from Paul Rothrock in the attack as a whole. So that's why going into this St. Louis game, like that makes me feel a little bit better about it, in that it's not the same situation as last year when they went in there and their offense was not just there at all. Yet I feel like they are in a pretty good spot with the personnel having played together enough. They know how each other play. This group seems to be pretty good at chance generation in general. And I thought it was pretty good at RSL. Not amazing, but it was good enough that they should have been able to at least take a result in that game. It left me feeling confident that if they can just kind of weather this injury crisis, get some guys back, this team's going to be able to score some goals this year, which is always a good thing. What did you think of the attacking performance at RSL in particular? Because there was some narratives about how it was like horrible and they need to spend $20 million to fix it. But I didn't see it like that.
I won't bring up XG because one single game XG is a novelty more than anything beyond that. And I, would hate to fill in for Noah's absence and then slander his name by talking about advanced stats and analytics. But
I didn't even say XG. I was talking about the eye test for the types of chances that they generated at RSL. I thought they were pretty good. Were they not?
I think they were good. I think it's always talking about this stuff is going to upset people who are upset already, because the ball didn't go in the back of the net. And that is a fair criticism. You had enough good opportunities. You should have put the ball in the back of the net more than one time in an offside play, which Paul Rothrock should have stayed onside. He didn't need to be offside. He didn't gain any advantage by being offside. He just didn't
Yeah.
maintain his run effectively enough. That's it happens. You get caught offside. But uh Rafa Cabral came up with three pretty big saves on Albert Rusnak off the top of my head. Two from direct free kicks, one of which was from like 45 yards out, and Bert almost chipped him into the post.
I think the
That was
one
the
that hurts the most was the Yamar, the set piece earlier where Jackson headed it back across for Yamar. It's like, man, on another day that could have easily been a goal, and maybe that flips the whole game.
I think that one and Snyder Brunel's like acrobatic overhead sort of kick, both going almost directly at Cabral, is tough. Um, Cabral made like the really good save where he makes a save but leaves it for Rusnak and then makes an incredible reaction save to block Rusnak's header into what otherwise would have been an open goal. Um, I think the team did enough to feel good about the fact that unless you are playing against a goalkeeper absolutely standing on his head and in an environment that very clearly, I know Jeremiah talked about it on No Sadietis, but like Hassani Dotson doesn't have the Sounders history against RSL. He also doesn't have a ton of success against them in their home stadium because nobody does. They are a very good home team for a number of reasons, but like playing in that stadium does things to your head, I think, that just
has to
don't help, but that they still did enough to have a reasonable shout for a result of some sort. Makes me feel pretty good. But also what they showed against Colorado, and although it wasn't as effective against RSL, but they showed against RSL, is that they are tweaking their system again. The Sounders have played more or less a similar game model where the focus is they want to keep the ball, they want to use the ball to diminish the other team's ability to create chances and also create their own chances. But we've seen them adjust it one way or another each season. And they seem to be reintegrating more of a press this season, which between that good possession play, being able to create more chances out of their possession play, but also playing a little bit higher line of engagement and a press should help them to create more turnover opportunities in more dangerous spaces in addition to being able to create out of possession. And I think if they can get that more dialed in, and we have seen them use this sort of road trip in the past to build team chemistry, get that togetherness, and dial in some of those tactics where they are, able to focus a little bit more when they're out of town working on stuff together. I think St. Louis should be a good proving ground for, okay, we did this and it was pretty effective, but we didn't have to do that much of it against Colorado. We did it, but it didn't really work as well as we would hope against RSL. Can we commit to it and keep working on it? And can it yield better results against St. Louis? And I think that is, if I can double dip, another reason for optimism here. I think that is going to be more difficult for teams to play against than what the Sounders offered last year. And if anything, should hopefully generate more attack.
Let's talk about our one areas of concern, the things that we're looking at and we're going like, oh, I don't know, I'm a little dicey about this. I'm a little bit worried about this. I mean, for me, I think in general, it's the defense because I think it was a recurring theme last year that there was a lot of poor and ill-timed concessions that dropped them points. I've been saying that I think that that's the biggest reason why they didn't get home field in the playoffs last year. And it's the biggest reason, right, why they got knocked out of the playoffs in the first round. Again, it actually was not the offense, contrary to a lot of the narratives. I think it was the defense. And when I look at that RSL game, I'm like, okay, I mean, that does not look very different than a lot of the stuff that we saw on that side of the ball last year. Now, I think if you're looking at the reasons for that, I think if you really want to hone in on it, if you think back to last year, like the whole notion in preseason and the whole goal in preseason last year going into the season was score more goals, be more dynamic offensively, and they were successful in that way productivity wise. They scored a bunch of goals, but I think there is a reality that if you change the way you play to be more aggressive in that way, you leave yourself more susceptible at the back. And I think you did see that last year. They gave up a lot of goals on counterattacks when they were throwing numbers forward. And again, it's always seemed to be at the worst time where it dropped them the points, and it really hurt them. And so when I look at that RSL game and I see the concessions that they had, I get that. I think the second one happens because they're chasing the game, they're playing from behind, and I think Schmetz even said that he told them to come out aggressive to start the second half, and then they immediately kind of get countered on. So hopefully that's not a situation that they didn't play from behind, honestly, all that much. I feel like last year that was a situation where they were playing from behind and they got caught out and they got punished because of it. So hopefully that's a situation that doesn't repeat itself a lot this year. But I think overall, I do look at it and I'm like, man, like if you concede goals like they did against RSL or like they were doing last year, you're gonna handicap yourself as far as being able to make a play for home playoff games. Which I think if you really want to win MLS Cup, like you really need to be at least getting a top 4 spot in the West, but I think ideally getting a top 2 spot in the West. Like if you want to make the path to MLS Cup as easy on yourself as possible, that you can't be dropping all kinds of points off concessions like that all year, like they were last year, or you'll end up in 5th or 6th again. And what we saw in the RSL game did make me feel a little bit like, man, I don't know if we're past that. What do you think? What's got you concerned or feeling uneasy so far?
I think the defense is a little bit concerning. Just the way both goals came about. You know, the first one is a really bad giveaway by Hassani Dotson that then no one reacts quickly enough to. Similarly, for all that some of the second goal is a product of them pushing to start the second half as they try to get back into the game, the giveaway to lose the ball is sloppy, but then the entire defense is out of position, and that's just not a thing that can happen. Rather than going into that additionally, I think a short-term concern that hopefully is just a short-term concern is that central midfield, where you are coming off of a season where Christian Roldan and Obed Vargas were one of the best midfield pairings in the league. They had such good chemistry and played off each other so well and knew exactly what the other one needed from each other. And I think there's the potential that whether it's Hassani Dotson or Snyder Brunel, you could have a really good pairing again with Christian. And I remain of the mind that Christian is one of, the 5 best number 6s in the league at this point. But with him and Hassani Dotson, they've only got 2 real competitive games together so far. The chemistry just isn't there yet. And what you get from Hassani is so different from what you get from Obed. I think the adjustment for both of those players is going to take a while to really figure out. And I think it's easy to see, like, with the two players' strengths and their experience, that this could be a really good pairing. I think one of the things the Sounders midfield struggled with last year was some degree of ball winning, just because Obed is good at lots of things, but being that, like, ball hungry, take it off of another guy type of player is not really his strength. He is really great at funneling a player into someone else who's going to win the ball, and his forward movement, his ability to move off the ball to get it from a teammate is really good. Dotson is a different kind of player. He is a little bit more of that ball winner, and he doesn't have the same ability moving forward on the field. I don't think that's necessarily a problem because of the other guys around him and Christian. I think if the two of them can do a little bit more winning the ball, Christian can distribute from back there. Hassani doesn't need to distribute or carry as much. He can give it to one of the wing backs or one of the center backs or Christian, or if Albert or Jesus is dropping in to get it, he can make a simple pass to one of those guys, and he doesn't have to be playing line-breaking passes. But for it to balance out, he needs to do more of the ball-winning stuff, and against RSL, setting aside the giveaway, he also makes a really unnecessary challenge in midfield to get the yellow, which then hampers how he's able to play the rest of the game. If it takes a while for them to figure that pairing out, and I think realistically, Schmetzer is going to let Hassani play until he's certain that guy can't be the starter next to Christian. So I think we may be in for at least the remainder of this road trip in the Vancouver series and CCC before we try another option if it's not working with him. But if they don't figure it out in the next couple games, I think that could be a real area of concern, because if you can't control the midfield, which is one of the things that they really struggled with against RSL, not only is RSL very direct, but they let a gang of high schoolers bully them in midfield. That's not going to be a recipe for success, and it's going to put your defense under even more pressure.
I think the acclamation with the Christian Hassani pairing is, it's a good point, because I think I was definitely hoping, Hassani's a veteran player. He's been in the league for a long time. Hopefully that would make for a smoother acclimation period where there's not as many of those kind of learning curve moments. But I think that is another thing I came away from the RSL game thinking was like, there probably is going to be some of that curve, and going into a big road trip like this and going into CCC, that is concerning. But all right, Tim, I had one more thought exercise for this section, but we're running a little low on time, so we're going to skip it. We're going to take one last ad break, and then we're going to come back and close it out with some rapid fire stuff. We'll be right back. Hakeson is a Seattle-based hot sauce and vinegar brand making some of the most flavorful hot sauce around. We've partnered up to craft a small batch, green-blended hot sauce, fermented to perfection with bright flavor and medium heat. We love it so much, the label even has our faces on it. You sold out the first batch, so we made another. Visit lobbingscorchers.com/sauce to order, and be sure to check out the full line of Hakeson Ferment sauces, including their limited seasonal flavors.
I'm Jessica with Hakeson Ferments, and you're listening to Lobbing Scorchers.
Good scoop.
Good scoop.
Welcome back from another ad break that you definitely did not skip. All right, Tim, we're only going to stick around for a few more minutes here so we can keep these quick at the end. But I did have a couple of agenda check items, and then I did want to ask you about Tacoma Defiance briefly as we close it out. But the first agenda that I wanted to hit, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. It's related to the whole Osaze versus Danny Musovski debate that we've been having. You can frame the agenda however you want. The Osaze is the starter debate, or the Moose is the starter debate. But I think that is the biggest lineup decision that I'm wondering about for this St. Louis game, because you have a situation where Osaze was honestly, he had one of the better preseason camps I've ever seen a Sounders player have. So I think everyone was on the same page that he should be starting the Colorado game. And I thought he played pretty well in that game, even though he didn't score. I said after that game, I was fully on board with him starting the RSL game. I think the RSL game was a little tougher sledding. And then on top of that, like, I really don't think he played like overtly badly or poorly in the RSL game, but Moose looked money. I mean, he was nails. He almost had that equalizing goal, which was very reminiscent of a lot of the goals that he scored last year. And I don't know, like, I just think that we might have reached a point as a city and as a society at large where we might just have to accept and acknowledge that Danny Musovski is a thing. Like, this guy just seems like he's automatically good for at least a goal a game right now, dating back to last year. And there was never really a point last year where I didn't feel like that. And to see him look that good in the RSL game, but also like who flipped that whole playoff series against Minnesota last year on its head? It was Moose. They did not start banging in goals in that series until they made the switch to put Moose on the field, and then he started scoring goals. The whole team scored 7 goals. So I do think that like there's got there at this point, like the whole it was an outlier, or he can't do it again, or he's not going to do it again. I just have yet to see evidence that he's not going to keep doing it. And that was kind of reinforced in the RSL game. And that's why, I mean, Nico and I talked about it this week on Kickoff, and like, I don't think I would be outraged either way, but I'm kind of leaning Moose. Where are you at on this?
I think maybe a little bit similar to Hassani Dotson, where I think you kind of have to let him keep running to a certain extent. And
Osaze?
Yeah. And I think it is additionally similar with Osaze and Hassani in that, like, Hassani, for the half that he played, I thought was pretty good, especially for his first game with the team. Similarly, Osaze, through the just short of 70 minutes that he played, looked really good. He didn't get a goal, but he plays a phenomenal through ball for Ferreira, for Rothrock's goal. I don't think his struggles against RSL, for all that, like, he didn't do the most with the touches he got, but he was on the field for an hour and he got 16 touches. That's less of an Osaze problem than it is an everybody else problem, especially when you're looking at, like, Paul Rothrock had Philip Quinton in a headlock for most of the game, but wasn't finding anybody with the passes once he got around him. I think if he, and maybe some of this is that Osaze wasn't making the runs that he needed to support, but I think if the team had made more of an effort to utilize Osaze and the things that he offers you beyond just putting the ball in the back of the net, I think that game goes a little bit different because you're able to force the other team's defense to play a little bit differently. And I think that's part of why I am inclined to say you keep going Osaze at least for one more game, just to see if RSL was an aberration. I think the ability he offers you to integrate and incorporate other players who are going to run off of him, I think just opens you up to do so much more. I'm not going to be upset if Musovski starts, because he probably is going to score a goal if he starts. But I guess they are also unlikely to entirely abandon the Osaze project 3 games into the season. But I think to a certain extent, you got to let a kid play through. And Osaze de Rosario is not a kid. He's an adult man. But, you kind of got to let a guy play through his bumps to know if they're bumps or if that's just the guy to a certain extent. But I don't think there's really a bad choice one way or the other.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. And I think ultimately both of these guys are going to be playing, especially with Jordan Morris out. So it's sort of a debate on one over the other when the reality is both of them are going to be playing a lot. So it's kind of going to be a let the best man win type of situation. And, I think best case scenario, you have two really good, but really high level productive options at the number 9, which that can only be of help to the Seattle Sounders. What do you think Schmetz is actually, we talked about what we think that they should do. What do you think Schmetz will do? I honestly don't know. I usually feel like I have a good read on what he's going to do, but here I couldn't tell you.
I think if I had to guess, I would say Osaze again. But that's based entirely on my guesses of what I think Schmetzer may have seen from the guys. I also think as a substitute, Musovski maybe is a better, like his skill set fits better as a super sub, but I really have no idea. It is fully a shot in the dark.
Yeah, no, it's a toss up, which is interesting. Like usually you have like a 60-40 or 70-30 kind of situation with this, but this feels 50-50. All right, Tim, one more here, and I think we can kind of weave these two topics together to close it out, because the other agenda that I wanted to talk about was a more general league-wide agenda, but I think we can tie it into what we wanted to talk about with Tacoma Defiance, which is just in general the play your kids agenda throughout the league. It's a theme that a lot of people have pointed out in the early going, and we saw what Real Salt Lake was able to do to Seattle, and we've all seen what Seattle's been able to do with their youth development system. But you've got just a lot of examples of it going on in the early season here. I think the Red Bulls are getting the most attention for it because Julian Hall is the early Golden Boot leader, and also like I gotta say, like I think I said it on one of our bonus shows, but like I respect the courage of Michael Bradley to field lineups like that when he has a player like Eric Choupo-Moting, who had 17 goals last year, and he would have taken zero criticism for just playing Choupo-Moting instead of Julian Hall. And no, Michael Bradley apparently saw what he saw on the training ground and in preseason and was like, I'm going to start Julian Hall. I'm going to start these two other kids that are also really highly touted. And it's paying off. And I've just been watching all this, the Red Bulls are having success with it. RSL's been having success with it. Colorado got a game winner from an 18-year-old. And I look at that and it's just like such a good example of why play your kids actually, especially if you're one of these teams that's kind of like rebuilding or not a lot to play for contention wise. I don't understand why teams don't do this more, because we're seeing the benefits that you get from it. But then on the flip side of it, I look at Atlanta United and they have a homegrown goalkeeper, Jaden Hibbert, who they started finally to play last year. Like Ronnie Dela did it under duress. He didn't play him all year. Finally, they were like, all right, Brad Guzan's literally announced he's retiring, so we'll let Jaden Hibbert be the starter. He looked fine. Like he looked pretty good for the most part. He looked like he could be a starting MLS goalkeeper. And then over the offseason, they go out and they sign 36-year-old Lucas Hoyos, who they're starting over Jaden Hibbert right now. And he looks terrible. Like he's been like probably the worst goalkeeper in the league so far. He looked like an absolute clown against the San Jose Earthquakes. And I'm looking at that. I'm like, Tata, what are we even talking about? Like there is no rationale in any dimension or galaxy why he should be starting Lucas Hoyos over Jaden Hibbert. And I think what we're seeing with all these other teams is kind of an illustration of that. But I guess before we talk Tacoma Defiance, like, do you have any thoughts on just the general kind of trend we're seeing with that?
Yeah, I mean, Red Bulls are a little bit obviously part of the player kids movement, but are sort of a confluence of multiple elements here where Michael Bradley feels as comfortable as he does playing all of these kids because a year ago, he was also their coach with RB2.
That's a good point, yeah.
he is so much more familiar with those players than he is with Eric Choupo-Moting. And for all that Eric Choupo-Moting scored 17 goals last year, that was kind of a surprise to a lot of people because he's played for big teams, but he hasn't really been good for any of those big teams. And he's an elder statesman, to put it gently at this point. But with Julian Hall, you also have this element of what Matt Doyle is constantly preaching. I assume he must have a hotkey to type this out at this point, but there is a very clear demonstration that if you can produce at the MLS Next Pro level, particularly as a 9, but if you can be a good player at that level, you can be a good player at USL Championship, you can be a good player at MLS. And especially if it is goal scoring, the things that allow you to do that consistently at each level will allow you to do it as you step up to the next level, as long as you're willing to put in the work and you're in a good environment. Julian Hall, obviously in a good environment, willing to put in the work. There's a reason. I think they were talking about it on Soccer Wise earlier this week, but there's a reason that before he was legally able to play in most games because of the calendar shift to playing night games and New Jersey labor laws, that he couldn't play, but they still were emphatic that he trains with the first team. This is a first team player. Like, that kid's got the juice. To your point, if you're a team in almost any circumstance, if you've got kids who you think might be able to hang, it only does you a disservice to not really find out and give them a shot, especially in these early season games where you're still just sort of finding things out, figuring out how your team is really going to look when the rubber hits the road, letting these young guys prove whether they can or cannot at this point, and then judging from there only makes sense. Because even if they're, I think looking at what the Sounders have done over the last couple seasons, if you give guys a run, even if you determine, okay, this guy isn't going to be our first choice and maybe his pathway is blocked, there are going to be other people, whether that's in the league or elsewhere, who see that talent and put a dollar amount to it. And if you are either getting on-field production or transfer fees or resources of some capacity from these players, that creates a virtuous cycle where not only are you demonstrating to the other guys down the pathway who have not reached your first team yet that you're going to get a shot. And if your path is blocked, we're going to find you a good place somewhere else, and it gives you additional resources to build around your team, make the team around those young guys better, so when they do come into the first team, their chances of success are greater. It all adds up. It has a cumulative effect, and yeah, there are plenty of teams reaping the rewards early this season.
Tim, real quick before we call it a wrap for this episode of Lobbing Scorchers, thank you first of all so much for tapping in. Great stuff tonight. But you're on the Tacoma Defiance beat. You do some TAC D coverage for Sounder at Heart, and you're pretty in the loop, in the know about what's going on with the Sounders youth development in general. Do you have anything that you can tell the people about what you're seeing with Tacoma Defiance so far, whether it's individual players to be excited about, or just how the team is looking, or what's going on with Seattle's youth development as it stands at this moment?
They're one game in. We don't really see their training as much. I'm sure that I could, if I asked Kevin Kay, he would get me in there to watch some training, but it's just been one game so far. It was a rough one against LAFC's second team. I think one player who is a academy developed guy who has been really exciting over the last year, who looked pretty fun in that game, was Edson Carley. He's wide player, midfielder. I think he's played in a number of positions for the academy and the first team, or Defiance. He played about 1,400 minutes last year, had a couple absolute golazzos. He just really wants to get the ball and go towards goal one way or another. Really fun to watch. I think the other guys who are really stood out from that first game are some guys that they brought in from outside of the org this offseason in what I think is a little bit of a shift of their approach to recruitment, where because they've demonstrated that young players who come into the team, if they play well, they're going to get a chance with the first team. Now they're getting access to sort of a higher caliber of young player from around the U.S. lower divisions. So one of the guys, Mark Bronick, he's the guy they brought in from USL League One Union Omaha. He's a 19-year-old striker who had just a peach of a headed goal against LAFC2. Really fun player. I think he's going to be really exciting to watch over the next few years. He was the USL League One Young Player of the Year last year. Xavi Nalati, I think is how you pronounce this other guy's name. He came from Monterey Bay this offseason. I believe Monterey Bay is a USL championship side. He played as sort of the 10 in this game and looked really good. He had some really nice moves and passes. And Rafael Jauregui, I think, is the other guy. He came up through Sacramento Republic. And then I think he was playing for a team in USL League One last season. He had the cross for one of the goals, a really nice play. He was training with the first team to fill out numbers last week and looked really good in training on Friday, and then had that good performance for Defiance. The other assister was a New Zealand U20 international, Cody Phoenix. Killer name. They got to make a Cody for Cody sub, which is always money. He seems like a really exciting, like advanced, sort of modern left fullback. I think those are just a handful of guys who worth doing a YouTube search for videos of every now and then.
Yeah, this Bronick guy, I think, is the one that I'm the most intrigued about based on what I hear so far. He seems pretty intriguing and like one that might have slipped through the cracks somehow, that has legitimate, genuine upside. So that's definitely one to track, where I kind of try to think of it as like, who are the guys that I could actually see making a rise? And, you know, we'll see what happens with Bronick, but that's the one that kind of sticks out to me right now.
Yeah, Bronick's a really interesting player. He is from Brooklyn, but played for the Barca residency program. Moved to Union Omaha to play for their eldest age group academy, and then signed to their first team. But with Union Omaha, he was playing primarily as like a wing player. I think sort of similar to the way Jordan Morris plays as a winger, where he is starting in wide positions but moving into more forward spots. I think some of that probably was a product of age and size, that he was, you know, he's a big kid, but he's still a kid, so he doesn't have a huge frame. I think as he continues to develop, some of what looked like weaknesses in his game when he was played out wide disappear a little bit, and as he's more able to use his size and physicality, I think he can be a really dangerous 9 who's a little bit more able to create his own shot. A lot of really interesting technical skill as a product of coming through the Barca residency, and he's got just a really cool shot on him. Like, he just very interesting technique to watch.
Great stuff. All right, Tim, we're going to call it right there. Thanks again for tapping in for pinch hit duty. Everyone, if you're watching on YouTube, like the video, rate 5 stars, all that good stuff. Follow us on all the socials. And we'll be back at it for the post-game live on Saturday, and we'll see you all then. And keep your eyes out for Backpost Runners, new Sounder at Heart Podcast Network podcast hosted by Tim Foss and Mark Kastner. But we will see you all on Saturday. Until then, we out. Peace.